Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Hello, and welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander. My friends, they would tell you I like to ask the hard questions. You know who I am in the group. I'm the person that's saying, okay, I'm going to ask this question, but don't feel like you have to answer it. And now I can be that friend for you too. Today's episode is a fun episode, and I am so thrilled to be bringing you this conversation. Now, I'm releasing this episode. If you're listening to it on the date of release, I'm releasing it on Thanksgiving Day in the US. Now, I know that for all of our other listeners worldwide, that date may not matter to you, but I specifically decided to release it because, one, for anybody listening to this in the US, this is like a fun, simple conversation to be listening to on a holiday weekend. But for everybody, US and worldwide, it's the holiday season. So I think that this is the perfect time to release this episode because this time of year is the time of year that we spend a lot of time with our family and our friends and our community, with the people who matter to us. And that's what today's episode is about. Today's episode is about leaning in and having deep conversations with the people that matter to you, because those deep conversations will deepen your relationship. When today's guest, Chris Burnett, reached out to me and told me about his personal project, I couldn't say yes fast enough. I actually think that I maybe responded to him within 30 minutes, and we were recording just days later. You see, during the lockdowns of 2020, Chris started this personal project to reconnect with the people in his life. It started out as weekly calls to catch up with someone, and then it progressed to asking his family and friends if he could interview them about their lives. To date, he's recorded over 70 conversations with his loved ones. And after seeing the impact that this project had on himself, he decided that he wanted to share this to a broader audience. So Chris did something that, honestly, I commend anyone for doing. He decided to write a book about the project, to talk about how beneficial it was to him and to his loved ones, but also to encourage others, us, anyone listening here, to initiate similar conversations. He believes that we all have a narrative worth telling, and it's time we gave each other the opportunity to share it. This was such a fun episode because Chris has really leaned in and created space to connect deeply with the people in his life that he cares about. Now, before we get to today's episode, I want to tell you that we are releasing this episode just days after Chris's book has launched. You can go find it right now. If you go to alexalex.link/conversations, it will take you directly to the sales page for the book. But if you want to go look it up yourself, the book is titled Conversations: Connecting with People in Our Lives by Chris Burnett. With that, let's hear a little bit more from Chris about his project. Chris, I'm so excited that you are here today. Question. Have you been on a podcast before?
I have, yeah. I've been on a couple. I actually hosted one for a little while. I was running a little not-for-profit initiative over in Melbourne, and we decided to launch a podcast. And the very first episode we did, we had one mic in the middle of the kitchen table and literally 10 of us sitting around the table. And as you can imagine, it was absolute chaos, but in the best way, in the most fun way. It was a really fun conversation, but it was difficult to try and actually get one person talking and everyone kind of waiting. And then, yeah, I've been on a couple of friends' podcasts, but very, very low-key stuff. But yeah, really excited to have a chat. Thanks again for having me on.
Yeah. I mean, I was just wondering if this was your first podcast. It's definitely not. It sounds like you're very comfortable behind the mic, and you're actually very comfortable behind the mic, even if you're not releasing what you're recording, because the entire reason that you're here today is because you've been doing this personal project for a while that when you told me about it, I just thought was so inspiring for people to hear because they might want to do this in their own life. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the project you've been doing?
Absolutely.
Like, we're going to talk more in depth. So just go with an overview.
Okay, so I guess it started from a point of disconnection, the lockdowns of 2020. I rediscovered reading as a hobby. I read Tuesdays with Maury, which is a beautiful little book about what's important in life. The message of connection with people just shot out to me. And as I say, I was feeling disconnected and homesick. I'm from Scotland, but I was living in Australia at the time. Basically, I wanted to do something with the feeling that I had from reading that book. So I started the personal project, the first year of which I wanted to have a call a week to catch up with someone that I hadn't spoken to in a while. So over the course of a year, I did 50 calls, caught up with over 50 people, some that I hadn't spoken to maybe 6 months, some it had been up to 6 years. And I'd kind of been journaling along the way, just noting what we'd been speaking about. Got to the end of that year, and I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more in depth with the people I'd been speaking to. So I kind of came up with this format, this structure to host these longer form, deeper dive conversations, which, as you've mentioned, are recorded. It's like a podcast, but the crucial thing is that the recording is not public facing. So it's just between me and the person I record with. But essentially, for the last 2 years, I've been interviewing my family and friends about their life. I've recorded 75 of these to date, and I'm in the process of writing about it because I want to share what I've been up to in the hope of, as you've kind of alluded to, encourage other people to do something similar. So yeah, that gives you a bit of an overview of the project, I guess. And yeah, happy to go in whichever direction you want from here.
Well, I love this because now that I've started a podcast, yes, starting a podcast that is released weekly and, managing guests that I've never met before, like you. And there's a lot of work to a official podcast. But at its core, a podcast is as simple as I could record even an episode of this podcast if I wanted to by opening my phone and turning on the voice recorder.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be something super complicated. You don't need fancy microphones and production software. You don't need any of it. You can just hit record. And so many of us are listening to this podcast episode right now on a device that is capable of doing this. So a lot of people can do this.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what you're doing. It doesn't need to be some big production. You just set up in a time and you hit record. It's really that accessible.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the time, I mean, we hang out with our friends all the time anyway. So it's just a different way of hanging out. That's kind of how I look at it. It's, instead of going down the pub and having a few beers and having a chat, we'll just do it at home and stick a mic in the middle and hit record. And it started off as a project. It's become my favorite hobby. And I've been so blessed and so grateful for everyone that shared their stories with me up till now. I've still got more people that I want to chat with. I've taken a little bit of a break at the minute to write the book about it. But yeah, as you say, it's one of those that it is actually kind of at our fingertips in terms of being able to do this. And what I'm hoping to do is, in terms of writing about it, is actually give over my kind of, here's my structure, here's how I've done it, here's the questions I ask. Feel free to go in your own way and change that up in whatever way you want. But I think giving people a tangible thing that they can just read from will actually make that even easier, hopefully, to just get started, because they can just literally read from the script, quote unquote.
Yeah. So when you ask people, first of all, what was it like asking people to do this? You were saying like some of them, it had been 6 years since you talked to them. Were you worried about asking those people? Like it's coming out of the blue, like, hey, I mean, you probably have to say something similar to, I really enjoy our friendship. I've missed connecting with you. I'm doing this project. I want to record with you. Like you kind of, I think, have to tell them that this matters to you.
Yeah. So I think what helped was that the first sort of iteration of what I'm doing was literally just a call to catch up, and that wasn't recorded. And so that message, I tried to keep as short and sweet as I could. And it was like, hey, it's been a minute. How are you? And do you fancy a call sometime to catch up? Literally, that was what I sent.
Love it.
Then in terms of the recorded conversation, it's a similar-ish message, but it's a bit more of like, I'm doing this thing. I'd love to chat to you. I'd love to interview you. I think interview, it's probably the word that people can kind of latch onto and understand. And so there's 3 parts to the conversation that I have with people. So when I record,
tell us.
So part 1 is questions about their life. And that usually is the longest part. And it literally just goes through the chronology of childhood to school to career to what they're up to at the minute. And then throw in questions about people that they know, relationships they're in, maybe a lived experience that they have that I don't. That's been a huge part of the conversations. And included in that has been a lot of vulnerability and hardship, which is just an incredibly special thing that my friends and family have kind of opened up to me with. And, then there's also just the random tales of their life, experiences abroad, traveling, that kind of thing. So that's part 1. And as I say, that is usually the biggest part. Part 2, we swap 3 words we'd use to describe one another. So while part 1 is really me asking them about their story, in parts 2 and 3, it's actually us talking about our relationship. And you're actually getting into the deep dive of what it means for you the 2 of you to be connected. So
to be connected.
Yeah. So part 2 is swapping affirmations. Essentially, I set the bit of homework beforehand. I tell them that this is what's going to happen. So they need to write down 3 words they'd use to describe me. I do the same for them. And then we just go back and forth and swap them and give a little explanation. And that's just a beautiful little thing to do with a loved one. And it's, it's not something I'd really done before. I'd been involved in a few, I guess, compliment circles at friends' birthdays and that kind of thing, but I'd never really sat intentionally and thought about 3 words I'd use to describe one another. And then part 3, we take a trip down memory lane. So again, it's a little bit of homework beforehand. I ask them to write down a few shared experiences, memories that come to mind when they think of us, when they think of the relationship. And I write down a few as well. And then we just kind of see what comes up. And it is really funny what comes up in terms of, something so what I deem as so insignificant was really significant for a friend in terms of our relationship. So part 3, I cannot stress enough, is really entertaining and funny just to get into those stories. And it's those conversations you tend to have in the pub or at dinner where you're like, oh, do you remember that time when we did that? But having those back to back to back is just hilarious. And so, as I say, part 2 and 3, it's about the relationship and it's about the friendship and it's about who you are as a collective, I suppose, and your collective narrative. And but through the parts 1, parts 2, parts 3, it's just been a special experience to go through with family and friends. And as I say, I'm really excited because I've still got more to do.
Now, I'm about to ask Chris to go deeper into each of those sections. Don't worry. We're going to do that. We're going to talk about each one. But there was actually a story I wanted to share while we were recording, but I didn't want to derail Chris's thought process about his project. So, hi, Chris, if you're listening, and hi, everyone else. I'm going to share the story now because it really stood out to me when we recorded the podcast. Specifically part 2 about the affirmations. About a year ago now, we were with some friends, our friends Mike and Sarah, and they don't live nearby. So we have to travel. We're staying with them. We're at their house and we're just sitting around one night hanging out. And Mike looks around the room and out of nowhere, he just kind of goes, I think we should all share why our friendships matter to each other. And we were like, okay, what did you have in mind? And he goes, I think we should go around and we should each say 3 things that are, meaningful or that we're proud of our friends for, or we admire about each other. And we'll go around the circle. We'll do it for each person. So I am doing this for Mike. I'm doing this for Sarah, and I'm doing this for my husband, Michael. Mike does the same for everybody. Sarah does the same for everybody. Michael does the same for everybody. And to alleviate some of the attention being on each of us, we took turns So it wasn't like everybody said something about you. Kind of did one after the other. And I have to say that like we were in tears at certain points. We were laughing at certain points. And it was just really beautiful to hear why each of our connections matter, what we appreciate about the other person, how they inspire us. You know, I told my friend Sarah, she brought this up just a couple weeks ago. She said she's making a big life transition. And she said to me, you know, remember when we sat around and said nice things to each other? She goes, you said that you're always really inspired by how I envision what I want my life to be. And I will ruthlessly curate that. I will take risks. I will set boundaries. I will be brave and go after things. And about a year later, she just brought up how in making that big life transition, she just kept reminding herself that that was something I admired about her. And it gave her the final bit of courage she needed to make the jump. And I think that things like that really matter. Taking the time for that kind of stuff really matters, because we never know how hearing how others perceive us is going to give us the courage, or how my words impacted her a year later. A year later. All right, let's get back to Chris's project. I mean, if we go through part by part, I would imagine part one, because you're talking about childhood and secondary school and uni and like all the way up, that you haven't known all of them since they were kids. So do you feel like you're learning a lot about people, like friends, family, people that matter to you from before you met them? Like things they've never maybe shared before?
100%. So I mentioned that I had been living in Australia for a bit, and I've done this with a lot of my friends that I made out there who I only had known for a maximum of 4 years. And so there were maybe little bits that I knew about in terms of I maybe knew where they grew up, or but there's so much that I don't know because I didn't know them before I'd met them in adult life, I suppose. So ask them, what were you like as a kid? Where did you grow up? Just those really basic questions reveal so much because I didn't know any of it. At the same time, talking to friends that I have known since primary school, it's slightly different, but it's also a really interesting conversation because there's still so much that I actually don't know, or maybe thought I knew, but they didn't know quite the reality of it.
Yeah, your memories didn't quite match up, maybe.
Yeah, and then when we talk about, say, primary school or even secondary school, the teachers or the subjects that stand out for us are different. And it's interesting to kind of get into that and think why that is. And it, along the way, it helps me, or it has helped me to reflect on my own perception and my own life story, I suppose, because some friends are quite adamant of turning the questions onto me when we talk. And
well, that's what I was going to ask, is like, this is a very one-sided. And I'm sure that because you've created this experience, they want to tap into it too. Like they want to get to know you. So you're saying that's quite common?
It's not that common because I'm quite good at just getting in with the next question. But I have a few friends who literally will be like, no, hold on. What were you like as a kid before we move on? Like I've had that quite a few times. And then two of my old housemates, every Tuesday it was like housemate night, and we would do something. So we'd go watch a movie or go for dinner or something. And one Tuesday, they sat me in the hot seat and kind of turned the tables onto me and asked, and it was just about a recording just about me. And as I say, I think that kind of gives you an example of, we just treated that as an activity to do, like instead of going to the pub or something. Like I think that's a good way to think about this, is you can just treat it as something different, something new to experience with your friend. But yeah, some friends really good at asking. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy they did that, because I was going to say, if you have not done that yet, I'm really good at asking questions. Let me know. I'll do it. Or you need some friends who do it. Like you need a part one of yourself in this collective. So I'm happy somebody forced you to do that.
Yeah. Well, so my old housemate, so Chris, lived with another Chris. There's two Chris's in the house. So he is a journalist. And so he's used to doing kind of longer form interviews, I guess.
Love this.
And then Charlie I would just describe her as a kind of a bit of a rogue. So it didn't really follow the kind of strict timeline as such, because Charlie kind of just came in with random questions here and there that kind of took me off guard and stuff along the way. And we have such a great relationship in terms of the three of us. So, we'd had a few beers and stuff. So it was just it's a really funny thing to listen back to. But I can tell such a difference as well, because I did that relatively recently. And that was probably 18 months into me doing these recorded conversations with people. And I can tell that I've changed the way I articulate, stories about my childhood, or I'm just so much more reflective. I'm so much more articulate when it comes to talking about me. And it's because along the way, people have turned the questions on to me.
I mean, pardon me for getting all emotional or like deep about this, but in doing this, your people are telling you that you matter. Like, you matter to them as well. And they probably want you to know that, because after you've made them feel like they matter by asking them to do this interview, they want you to know the same. So
yeah, for sure. And I can't stress that enough. That's a big part of me.
You can't really push it down anymore. You can't anymore be like, oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Like, let's just move on to the next thing. Because they're trying to let you know the same thing you're letting them know.
Yeah.
I love that.
I know. I mean, for me, like, I don't want that to be happening every conversation, because I feel like I'm almost like repeating myself, but I fully get it. And I'm fully like present in that moment of why they're asking me. And I do really want to give it back to them as well, because ultimately, like, asking my family and friends, for me, it's like, I just want to know more about you, and I want to know you on a deeper level. That is the core of all of this. And I mean, for me, like, connection is, it's the be all and end all, really. Like, nothing matters more. So, that's kind of why I'm doing this. And it's why I've asked so many of my family and friends and questions about their life, because I actually just want to know the full them and know their story. And the fact that then, as you say, they ask me things, I do really appreciate that as well.
So I want to know that middle section. When you are asking about the 3 words, and I would imagine that a lot of people, this is the first time they've really been asked to do an activity like that is not with somebody that is maybe their like romantic partner. How does that go? How is it like impacting your friendships? Is it awkward at first? Like, tell me a little bit more about what you've seen come of the middle section, the asking each other for 3 words.
It is a little awkward at first, especially with guys. So, I mean, guys, I guess we just don't really take the time to sit and actually say what we appreciate about one another. We're more so just like ragging on each other all the time, which is a show of endearment, I must say. But I think it's been, as I say, a little bit awkward. I have a few friends who up front were like, I'm really bad at taking compliments, so I'm not going to like this part. But afterwards have then gone, you know what? That was great.
Yeah.
It's just a really nice thing to do at the end of the day. This is someone you care about sitting across from you, and you're just sharing what you like about them. It's also just a little interesting exercise to do the homework, because so many different words come up, right? And then you try and you may get the thesaurus out and you try and work out what's that magic keyword that I want to use. It's quite subjective as well. You could do it on a different day and 3 other words would come about. But I think that the real point of it is it's just a way for me to tell them what I like about them, and also for us to kind of reflect on what we like about each other and why we're friends. And it's an interesting one for me as well, having done it with so many people, and people using similar words or different words, and people knowing me from different times of my life and different experiences of my life that maybe use the same word or a different word. And that, if enough people are telling me that I'm X, then I must be. It's funny as well. Some friends kind of forget to do the homework, and they just kind of off the cuff it. And one of my friends just used the word Scottish, which was a little bit of a cop-out, but he took it really literally. Like, oh yeah, but if I was describing you to someone, I would say that you're Scottish. And
okay.
I was like, okay, I actually kind of appreciated he talked about the fact that most of our shared memories together have involved alcohol, and I've got a really dry, sarcastic sense of humor. And therefore, I kind of was like, okay, no, that's fair, actually. Yeah, the Scottish is, okay.
Like, if somebody was like, what do you mean Scottish? He would actually have an answer, is what you're saying. He could expand a little bit.
And that's a key part of this, right? It's not just give me the 3 words. It's say the word and then give a little, why did that come to mind? And some people are a little bit, oh, I didn't realize I had to explain it. But the explanation part is really where the sort of the magic happens, because
Yes.
then they go, well, actually, it's more so, it's not that word I used. It's actually more like this because, and then they give a bit of an explanation. And yeah, I've learned a lot about myself, done a lot of self-reflection through this exercise and through the words people have used to describe me. But it's also just been really special to hear, as I say, especially like guy mates who afterwards are like, oh, that was that part too. I really, really enjoyed that. Like, I really liked the fact that you said I was loyal, or whatever word it was that I used. And that's always well, yes, because it's a really lovely thing to do. Like, yeah, but it's just not something that we're kind of used to.
Just to remind you that I have a 2-part episode about men's friendships. Episodes 31 and 32 are kind of an overview of men's friendships. What is maybe keeping them more surface level, like societal messaging, things like that, how hard it is for men to break out of this box and do things like exactly what Chris is talking about, to be vulnerable, to tell each other how much you mean to each other. There's, like, as much as I would love to say to every guy out there, like, go do that, I get that there feels like there's pressure to not do that. And if you want to hear more about why that pressure exists, how to push yourself outside the box and do things differently, go listen to episode 31 and 32. I mean, I love part 2. I love all the parts of this, but part 2, especially because you are a guy. I love this because what you're doing is setting this precedent that it's okay to say things like this to each other. And I get that you're not going to sit around at the pub every weekend and throw this around. But if some big life milestone happens, you've now opened the door where you could look at a friend and be like, you did that because you are so consistent. Like, remember when I told you were consistent? This is the outcome of that. And I'm so happy for you that you've achieved whatever this thing is they were going for. Like, you've literally cracked open a door that I don't know, but I would guess will follow through your friendships for a really long time.
I hope so. I think just that showing appreciation for one another and kind of opening the door to a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of awkwardness, a little bit of uncomfort, that again deepens the connection. And yeah, I love your point about, milestones down the line, being able to reflect on the word that I've used. And
yeah, or just, it could be 15 years down the line being able to say, my expectation for, guys isn't that they're just going to walk around throwing this around like confetti all the time, but the ability to do it when it feels right instead of feeling like it's awkward matters. Like, it matters that you feel like you've cracked a door open and you could say it. It could even be something like 15 years down the line saying, you were really, like, one of the words was goofy. And you really were goofy when you were a younger guy, but now you've really become the most consistent person I know. And like, showing that they've changed. There's so many ways that this could show up in just like a couple sentences that actually would really matter. And I love that.
yeah.
And I hope that that's how it plays out for you.
Yeah, I hope so too. It's also really interesting to do it with like my parents and aunties and uncles, for example, because they've known me my whole life, right? And they're more likely to use words or they have used words that describe me as a kid. And kind of have been able to track that. And, they've reflected that I was a really sensitive kid. And I think that still plays out now in different ways. But then they're also, they've used words like adventurous, for example, because I've lived abroad in a few different spots, and people that knew me as a kid would not have seen that coming at all, because as a kid, I was always like, I wouldn't do anything myself. I was always like, oh, who's going to be there? And, if a friend wasn't going to join me doing something, I wouldn't do it. And so one of my family friends, like, that's kind of her perception of me. So when she hears that I've been here, there, and everywhere, it's a real surprise. So yeah, you get that kind of reflection on what you were like as a kid and to what you're like now just through kind of 3 words. And so that's a really interesting part 2 as well.
Yeah. So part 3, where you share the
Yeah.
memories. I'm assuming this is where things really pick up. People love to tell a story, go down memory lane, talk about their perspective. Do you think this is one of the easy? I mean, you're also at the end, so people are kind of more used to this conversation by this point. But do you feel like this is maybe one of the easiest parts for people
Oh yeah, it is.
to partake
It's
in?
definitely the easiest part. Partly as well because at that stage it's completely a two-way thing. So we're both in these stories. It's stories that we share. So it is literally one of us will bring something up, and then the other one will be like, "Oh, I knew you were going to mention that. I had that down too." And then we just dive in and what do you remember about that? And it's really entertaining to reflect on how you remember things slightly differently or the specific parts of a memory that come to the surface for you. And yeah, it definitely is the easiest part. It's also the funniest part. It's the most entertaining part because while through this project there's a lot of vulnerability and I've built a lot of empathy and talked about some really serious things, and it's also equally been an incredible amount of fun. And part 3 is that. And I think it's the best way to wrap up as well because you're just kind of sore, your cheeks are sore from laughing, and it just kind of ends things on a real high. And I've done it with friends that I haven't actually spent that much time with really. So part 3 is relatively small, but then when I do it with mates that I've known for so long, it's part 3 could go on for an hour and a half, 2 hours easily.
Yeah.
And we've already been speaking for a couple hours. So
because you lived so much life together.
Yeah.
You have lots of memories because at one point you were probably doing your day-to-day life together in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love telling stories. I love sharing stories. I love hearing stories. And when you get you have those friends that are great storytellers and you just let them run wild with sharing their version of events, it's incredible. And I think the key thing is, having this on record, I can then go back and listen and have this incredibly fun podcast that I can just dip into whenever I want and know that there's a good laugh coming here because so-and-so is going to bring up that time in Amsterdam or whatever it is,
I just love your project. I don't know the answer to this, but I'm just curious. When you go back and retell all these stories, and I know you're talking with a lot of people, right? 75 plus people. So this isn't going to happen with everybody. But have there been any moments where you're talking to someone and you realize that, I don't know, you used to love listening to a certain type of music together. And then you're like, why don't we listen to that music anymore? Does it rekindle anything ever?
That's a great question. When you said that, the first thing that came to mind was actually the complete opposite of that, where me and my friend, my best mate, we reflected on the fact that we used to have the exact same music taste, go to gigs all the time together. And then at some point in time, we just kind of diverged. And I think the real key of it is that he listens to maybe not a lot of music, but in a lot of depth, whereas I listen to a lot of music, but not with a lot of depth, quite shallow listening in terms of I'm there for the melodies, for that. He's there for the meaning behind the song and the lyrics and really wants to sink into that. So we've ended up just kind of diverging in terms of our tastes. In terms of whether it's rekindled anything, I mean, it's probably been a case of, we're remembering trips that we've been on and we're like, oh, we need to do something like that again. And why aren't we? Why aren't we thinking about that? And why aren't we planning to do that? And so that actually did come to fruition in lockdown. Me and my housemates, we recreated our own version of my favorite TV show, which is called Taskmaster. And it's basically this set of comedians get set. They go to this house and they pre-record themselves doing ridiculous tasks. So for example, the first task is you're going to walk into the next room and there's going to be a watermelon and you have 1 minute to eat as much watermelon as you can. So some of them go grab a knife from the kitchen and start carving the watermelon. Some of them just throw it on the floor and just shovel it in their mouth. It's just 5 funny people doing the same thing in a slightly different way. Anyway, we created not that specific task, but we recreated doing the show in lockdown. And from one of those conversations where we recounted a few memories from doing that, we then were like, oh, what? We need to do that again because we know how to do it. And then we ended up doing it again in a couple of months down the line. So yeah, that's probably the most tangible one I can think of in terms of something that's come about because we've shared a story or two.
I was just curious because I would think that when you talk about this stuff with people, right, connections have wane, or there's been distance, or that thing that you used to love doing together, you don't really do anymore. But some of the simpler stuff, you could be like, why don't we? Like, I know we maybe don't have time to meet up for concerts all the time, but there's no reason we couldn't be like trading back and forth what we're listening to. And again, there's no right or wrong. I didn't know the answer for anybody listening when I asked you that question, but because I think there will be people that are inspired to do this project, if you do it, I would listen for those because I think it might help people kind of like find something new to tap into in that friendship and whatever this new stage is.
Yeah.
That's also just my friendship brain.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Here.
Because that's another key part of this, right? I've talked a lot about deepening the connection, but also just sustaining it. And I think, bringing up the memories and then going, oh, why don't we do that anymore? Like, we could.
Yeah, or find like a new version of that fits our current season of life.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we can't do it the way we did it when we were in secondary school, but we both still like that thing. There's no reason we couldn't figure out a new way to like incorporate that into our lives so that it's a reason we stay in contact.
Totally.
I want to explain a little bit further why I asked that question to Chris, because I really do hope that people do this project on whatever scale, even if it's just a couple interviews. And I think that doing this, like, let me give you this thought so you can maximize it. You are going to do these interviews with people that you care about. You have some sort of belief about this connection. They matter to me. We had fun times together. We care about each other, whatever these beliefs are. And you have these beliefs, which I call story roots, because at one point you were experiencing life together. You were present. You were making memories and going out and doing things and going to school together, like whatever. You were doing things together. And when you do things, you learn about each other, you make memories, you act in ways that show that you know each other and care about each other, whatever it is that belief is. And that's the evidence that supports your belief. Okay. That's an overview of something called my Roots of Connection framework, which you can find at alexalex.link/roots. Okay. So you're doing this interview and sitting here and talking, I've already mentioned that like to your friend, to your family member, there's some sense of like, hey, you matter to me. And I want to take this time to really reflect on our connection and learn more about you. Okay. That's a piece of it. But that is really putting focus on like that belief. And while you're in here talking about this, you might be able to find new ways to stay connected, new things that you text each other about, new shared experience. These are called our shared experience roots. They are the experiences and the interests that you have that you reach out to each other about. They're like the reason you would text someone like, hey, we used to love running together is what you would realize in this conversation. So now maybe you suggest that you start running again together. Or maybe you realize that, I don't know, you used to love to cook together. And although you live on opposite sides of the country and maybe you can't cook together all the time, one, you could plan some trips to meet up and cook together. But two, you could be sharing recipes, and sharing recipes would be reasons to text each other, which would be reasons to stay in contact, which might lead to like, hey, how is life going? How are you doing? You can kind of rekindle some of these shared experiences and shared interests in new formats, because the old format of cooking dinner together every night may not be feasible. That's why I'm asking this question. I think that in doing this interview, you have a really, really unique opportunity to deep dive and reflect on what is connecting these friendships and maybe what used to connect these friendships that you can reignite to keep you connected now. Okay, so we've done all this. I have a couple questions about the aftermath of your project. First of all, I mean, this kind of relates to the question I just asked, but do you think it's changed your friendships and your relationships with the people you love?
Yeah. So with people that I'd maybe lost a bit of touch with, doing the deeper dive recorded chat has brought us close together again.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've loved is that quite a few friends have since returned the, hey, it's been a minute message
Mm-hmm.
to reach out, or have just sent a voice note without any context and it's just an update of their life. And I absolutely love that. And I think I've just kind of put myself on people's radar again in a really, by taking the time to show an interest in their story. And I've got so many amazing friendships that I won't see them for a number of years. But then when we do reconnect, we just drop straight back into it. And I think having done these recorded chats and these longer form conversations, it makes it even easier just to drop straight back in. And it's as if no time has passed, because I really do know these people on a different level now. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you cross paths with so many people in your adult life, especially if you move around. And now, like, I've just recently moved to Toronto and I've already made a couple of friends here that I'm like, well, can't wait to sit and ask them about their life. But I'm giving it a bit of time because I want there to be some shared experiences, memories. So that part 3. But I'm already like, yeah, this is going to be good because I know that it's going to bring us closer together as well. So some of my relationships as well, with family, for example, I think there is so much about my cousins and my aunties and uncles' lives that I kind of almost took for granted. Like, I sort of knew, but did I really know? No. And it took asking the questions, and I had some really vulnerable chats with them, and that we'd never had before, because we're used to getting together in a group setting. And this was like, especially with my aunties and uncles, the first time we really sat down one-on-one and properly like had a chat. And that was super cool. And I remember my auntie beforehand, she was super nervous because, there's a microphone there. And afterwards, she was like, that was amazing. I absolutely loved that. And that reaction just always sticks out, just because of how sort of nervous she was, and then how much she enjoyed it. And the conversation, there was ups and downs in the conversation, but ultimately she really, enjoyed that. And I think as well, we kind of take for granted gratitude in our relationships.
Mm.
And I think just reaching out and asking someone to do this is a real good way of kind of showing that gratitude.
What I was thinking is, so I have I'm not going to tell you this whole thing because you don't need to hear it all right now, but basically I have this whole framework for the things that are holding our friendships and I think all relationships together. And one of them is our beliefs about those relationships. And what happens is, when you're doing life together all the time, of course your friend cares about you because like you saw them yesterday and you know what their favorite ice cream flavor is and you're going to see them at the pub tomorrow. You don't doubt that. The more time goes on, we start to doubt whether our friends care. Will they show up for us? Do they want to be our friends? Like, we question our own beliefs, rightfully so, because you haven't had any evidence to support it in a while. And what you're doing in asking people to do this is making a very direct piece of evidence that says, hey, I care about you and I want to know you better. So now they can't question anymore that you care. So I'm not surprised that they're reaching out back to you and things like that, because it's removed, like, your action has removed their uncertainty. And I think that is really beautiful. And I also think that it's one thing to just reach out to somebody after 6 years and say, hey, I've thought about you. Like, okay. It is another thing to say, hey, I've thought about you. I appreciate our friendship, even though it's been a long time, so much that I want to sit down and relive all the great things about our friendship and record it so I can listen back to it. Like, that's a pretty big piece of evidence. So I really commend you for making that move.
Thank you.
I know I'm just laying compliments on you, but
I'm here for it. There's a couple of things as well that kind of anyone listening to this I kind of want to get across to them. So
Yeah.
one is that there's a lot of talk and a lot of books out there about human connection.
Mhm.
But for me, they always talk about it in kind of the more abstract of like connecting with randoms, with other people. And I'm like, kind of look at that and think, you already got people in your life. And it's, I want to kind of stress that because I've had a few friends ask me, oh, is this something you're doing with just people you just meet? Would you just go and do it with someone you meet on the street or whatever, have a random interaction with? And I say that that's actually the opposite of the point of what I'm trying to do here, which is like, I've got people in my life. And, the book is deepening connection with people in our lives. So, like, as you say, it's people that maybe I haven't spoken to in a good few years. And some of them as well, we only spent a summer together. And so it's kind of like in terms of actual physical time together, there's not that much of it, but they're just maybe like a really interesting person or just someone I like admire or want to stay in touch with. And so I just want to know their backstory a little bit more, but I am already connected to them. I'm not just going out there and trying to find. And then the other part as well is like, this is a really cool thing to do in terms of to make your family member or friend feel special. And I kind of can see this as being you could shape it around a birthday or an anniversary or the festive period or something as a kind of gift to give someone is like, I'm going to sit down and ask you about your story and then here's a recording of it. So if you ever want to listen back and you can hear how you reflect on things and tell your own story, here you go. And I think that what I mentioned about my auntie kind of being really nervous beforehand, she made a comment about kind of like not feeling like important enough to be interviewed. And I think there's something there where we just assume that you need to have some sort of celebrity status or something to be interesting enough. But that's wrong in my view. And because this isn't public, this is just for me and them.
Yeah.
Like, they are the most interesting person for me to chat to. I don't really care about people I don't know in that same way. I want to deepen the connection with the people I do know. So yeah, it's just a couple of things I wanted to sort of bring up because it's been playing on my mind as I've been writing about it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point. Both of them, both points are really important. The first one in particular just hits on something, which is, so many people come to me and it's like, I want to learn how to make friends. I want to move across the country because the right people aren't here. And like somehow we've just been convinced that we really don't have any meaningful connections because they don't hit some peak that we can't even describe. So quite often when I talk to people, it's like, you have more than you realize. And you just aren't appreciating that. Like that goes back to the gratitude piece. And that's not to say that maybe you don't want to supplement and add, but you probably aren't starting from scratch like you think you are. Like somehow we've been convinced that we just don't have the meaningful connections that really most people are surrounded by every day. They just don't want to see the value, even if it's small. So I think that doing this project is such a practiced way almost to tap into that and remind yourself that you do have a lot of really valuable connections in your life.
And there's so much to learn about each other. I mean, like I'm sure everyone listening to this could think of a friend that has had maybe some sort of hardship or lived experience that they kind of know about, but have never really asked about because it's difficult to create that space for the vulnerability. But doing this and taking the time allows for that. Now, there's been a few things that people haven't wanted to talk to me about, and absolutely that is fine. Like the first thing I say before we hit record is, well, I remind them of the structure. And then I basically say, and if there's anything you don't want to talk about, we absolutely do not need to talk about. So there's been a few instances where people have been like, oh, I didn't realize you were going to ask me that. Is it okay if we don't? And I'm like, that's fine. Let's just move on.
Yeah.
That's actually been the minority of the time. Like the vast majority of the time, people are willing to share. And it's because you're intentionally taking the time to ask and really doing it in a safe space where you're like, yes, it is recorded, but it's just between us. And there's that trust there already. Because as I say, you're doing it with someone you know. So there's already a level of trust there. And yeah, I mean, it's not all about the vulnerability and that, but obviously that's formed a massive part. And I'm incredibly grateful for friends that have opened up about loss, racism, like their faith. And, one friend told me about an eating disorder she had. And yeah, I had no idea about it. And she just brought it up. I didn't ask about it because I didn't know anything. And just to have that that was a beautifully special thing for her to share with me. And it just kind of astounds me, like, how awesome my friends are, basically, through that kind of conversation, as well as just recounting the silly stories and the fun times that we have together as well.
Yeah, I'm really admiring how they're moving through the world and what they've gone through. So we have to wrap this up at some point. We've hit that point. But to close it out, you told me that your goal in now sharing this project, like your original goal was obviously to do this, to deepen your relationships. Now that you are sharing it, your goal is to have just one person decide to maybe recreate this in whatever way they want, but a similar project, and like inspire one person to do it. And I think you're going to have no problem achieving that goal, potentially tenfold, 100-fold. We'll see. So you have written a book for people to read and get some of the structure, some of the questions, some of your tips and tricks, and I'm sure also just like why you think this matters. You want to tell people a little bit about the book so they can go find it, because I know somebody's going to go find it and do this project.
I think it's important to note that I didn't set out with the idea of writing a book. I think that's really important, because what it's meant is that I've been intrinsically motivated throughout this. The point of doing this, the why, has been to get to know my family and friends on a deeper level and to deepen our connection, and also to have a bit of fun just remembering some good times to share together. So that has been the point up till now, and will continue to be the point beyond writing the book. The reason I want to write the book is that I've had a couple of friends who I've had these chats with say that they want to do it as well, and have asked me for a list of questions. And I actually genuinely didn't have a list of questions until I got asked. And so I was like, okay, I need to actually write these down, because I just kind of write down a few bullet points and I just kind of go off from there. But I do have a set of questions for everybody. And then depending on who I'm speaking to, I will jot down a few things beforehand as well that I know I'm going to want to ask them about, or I know will come up at some point. Yeah, once my friends started asking me about that, I wanted to then be able to share that with them and hopefully encourage them to do it. And I thought, well, you know what? Why don't I just see if I enjoy the writing process and maybe put this out to a few more family and friends and kind of have it like that. And as you say, the point of me writing this book is to share what I've done, to share the story of what I've done. And I'm including quotes from the conversations I've had. So I've gone back to my family and friends, and I mean, the quotes are anonymized, but I've got permission from them all to share these stories. And yeah, they range from relatively, deep topics to just the silly and the fun. And, one of my friends talking about an acting semester that she did at uni, and it was method acting, and she had to be a cat. So her homework was to go home and pretend to be a cat. And her roommates walked in on her just like purring and licking her like wrist in the mirror and stuff.
Asking a lot of questions, I'm sure.
So just things like that are also like, I think that really hammers home what this is about. It's also the fun stuff. So yeah, the book is sharing the story of what I've done, but also sharing the stories that people have told me along the way. And the whole point is to encourage others to consider doing it. Now, when I say doing it, I don't necessarily mean you have to go out and set out to do 75 of these. I'm saying you could just do one. You could take your partner, you could take your best friend, you could take an older relative. I think a lot of people jump to older relatives when they hear this. And absolutely, that is part of it too. I've done it with both my grandmas, and that's an incredibly special thing to have. And I'd had a similar chat with my grandma and granda years ago, and I just recorded one at the time, but it kind of planted the seed for what I'm doing now. But my granddad's since passed, but being able to play that back and hear his voice, it's like I'm back in the room with him. And that's, really cool. So, that is also an incredibly special and valid thing. But my whole thing is that people have stories to tell now. You don't need to wait until later in life to hear the whole life story. People have stories to share now. So yeah, I want to encourage others to do it. And as I say, a couple of my mates have gone away and had similar conversations, which is brilliant. But my kind of hope with this book is that one person that I don't know, one random, reads it, goes away, has one of these conversations, and then just sends me a message and says, hey, read your book. I went and had one of these conversations, really enjoyed it. Thank you. That would be the impact for me. That would be like, okay, this has all been worth it.
The book part, the podcast part is worth it for you and your own life. Yeah. Like that's, like the writing of the book and putting it up there, one person. Yeah.
100%. I mean, yeah, in some ways, like the book is just a bonus thing, to be honest, because I just feel like everyone has a narrative worth sharing. And we all have that opportunity to allow people a space to tell it. And who better to ask you and to kind of get to your story than someone in your life, a loved one. So I just want to encourage more of that. And, you know, I've benefited so much mental health wise, being able to open up and be vulnerable. And I just want other people to experience that. And so that's the whole point of the book. As I say, it's called Conversations, Deepening Connection with People in Our Lives. It's going to be out on Amazon, available as a paperback and as an ebook. It'll be out just in time for this podcast coming live.
For this podcast.
You'll be getting the links.
I'm so inspired by Chris's project that I told him we would release it around the same time. We will link to it in the show notes. We will link to wherever Chris tells us to link to. You can go find all the things and you'll have a way to message him when some random listener decides to take this on. He wants to hear from you. And honestly, I want to hear from you too. If you listen to this podcast and that was the inspiration, let us know because we want to hear how it affected you.
Absolutely.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on here and for reaching out and telling me about the project and spending this time like deep diving into all the parts of it. I think this gives people a really great roadmap for how they might go about this on their own.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And hopefully there's some people out there who feel inspired to go and have some similar conversations and deepen their connections. That would be amazing. But yeah, thank you for your time and thanks for having me.
I am sure some people are going to go do it. Okay. Who else is inspired? Anybody else considering this project? Because it can't just be me. I am so grateful to Chris for coming on here, for reaching out, for taking the time to share about all the conversations he's having. And honestly, for taking the time to write this book. His book is titled Conversations, Connecting with People in Our Lives. And at the time I'm releasing this episode, it is live. Like his book has just been released only a couple days before now. There's a link in the show notes that will take you directly to the book. It is alexalex.link/conversations. And Chris and I are not joking. If you even do one interview, will you message us? We would love to hear about how that conversation went, how you feel it impacted your friendships or your familial relationships or your romantic relationships or your relationships with your children, whoever it is that you are spending the time to sit down and connect with. We want to hear about it. With that, I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @itsAlexAlexander. Or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.